Coming up in a newscast, President Yoon travels to Spain for the NATO summit. First, he'll meet the Australian PM and NATO Secretary General. G7 leaders agreed to find ways to cut Russia off from financing its war in Ukraine. The measures involve imposing additional sanctions on oil exports. The annual monsoon season begins in South Korea. Authorities advise caution as heavy downpours are forecast this week.
Hello, it's good to have you with us. I'm Daniel Che. Let's begin with our top story. NATO is stepping up engagement with its four partners in the Asia-Pacific region, South Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, by inviting them to the summit in Madrid. The move is seen as part of wider efforts by the U.S. to counter China and its growing global influence. Kim Da-mi explains further.
The 2022 NATO summit may be another sign of Atlantic-Pacific nations teaming up against the bellicose challenge of Russia, and particularly the growing global assertiveness of China. By inviting South Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand as Asia-Pacific partners, the U.S. is once again making use of NATO to keep Beijing in check.
Countering China at NATO appears to be not enough for the US, since NATO is a European security alliance. So by inviting Indo-Pacific countries, Washington is trying to pinpoint the Chinese threat at NATO.
In fact, NATO's new strategic concept is set to include the very first mention of China and its threats, a clear indication that China issues will no doubt top this year's agenda. Another expert points out that South Korea's debut at the global military alliance also comes in a timely manner.
Economically, the US has brought South Korea into China issues with IPEF, but politically, Seoul cannot join the Quad for now, so the Biden administration has invited South Korea, citing global security reasons.
That also falls in line with the Yoon administration's pursuit of beefing up comprehensive security networks with its partners. Plus, Yoon's presence at NATO will serve as a perfect opportunity for Seoul to drum up international cooperation on North Korea issues, especially the regime's latest nuclear threats. The Biden administration has been upfront that the participation of Indo-Pacific nations at NATO directly targets China. And with Seoul's ambitious goal of strengthening value solidarity based on a liberal democracy, South Korea is expected to play along with Washington's stance. But watchers also caution against the possibility of retaliatory action by Beijing on Seoul, even in a discreet manner, such as during the diesel exhaust fluid shortage in South Korea, which stemmed from China's suspension of urea exports. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
President Yoon begins his first full day in Madrid on this Tuesday, first with a bilateral summit with his Australian counterpart, as the South Korean leader kicks off his official itinerary at NATO 2022. Yoon told his aides that the NATO gathering in Madrid will be where we find a common point between South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy and NATO's new strategic concept. Our Moon is traveling with the president and files us this report from Madrid.
President Yoon begins his official itinerary on this Tuesday with a bilateral summit with the newly elected Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese. Australia, along with South Korea, Japan, and New Zealand, has been invited as a partner nation to attend the summit of the military alliance of 30 countries. That one-on-one will be followed by a sit-down with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg and a gala dinner hosted by King Philip VI of Spain.
NATO's invitation to Asia-Pacific countries, including South Korea, indicates a realization of the growing strategic importance of the Indo-Pacific region.
That's in part because of greater China-Russia cooperation, as stated by the NATO chief at a pre-summit press conference.
Our new concept will guide us in an era of strategic competition. I expect it will make clear that allies consider Russia as the most significant and direct threat to our security. It will address China for the first time and the challenges that Beijing poses to our security, interests, and values.
But presidential office aides say Seoul's NATO participation cannot be viewed as anti-China or anti-Russia. Analysts have been saying that South Korea may in fact seek to coordinate with NATO countries in securing supply chains and ensuring open maritime access upon growing threats from China. President Yoon, during a meeting with his aides this morning, is reported to have defined Madrid as where South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy and global peace initiative meets the new strategic concept to be unveiled by NATO 2022. Now, experts say President Yoon Suk-yeol's participation in the NATO summit this time reflects his administration's willingness to expand South Korea's role in regional and international affairs. Moon Gun-young, Arirang News, Madrid.
G7 leaders agreed to find ways to cut Russia off from financing its war in Ukraine. In a joint statement on Tuesday, they vowed to impose additional sanctions on Moscow's oil exports, such as prohibiting its transportation if being sold above a certain price. This comes as President Zelensky addressed officials at the G7 summit via video link, urging the world to help stop the war. South Korea sent additional humanitarian aid to Ukraine. According to the Foreign Ministry, 25 tons of emergency supplies are sent, including bioprotection suits, medical protective masks, oxygen concentrators, and emergency medicine. This is a third non-lethal aid package that Seoul has sent to Ukraine, following donations in March and April. South Korea reported 9,896 new COVID-19 infections as of Monday midnight, almost 3 times the tally from the day before, mainly due to increased testing after the weekend. A near 600 spike on week, 5 related deaths and 62 critically ill patients. Authorities warn a resurgence could happen either in the summer or autumn. A former South Korean president will be temporarily released from prison for 3 months due to poor health. The Suwon District Prosecutor's Office decided to suspend Myung-bak's sentence upon his request. He is currently in hospital and being treated for chronic illnesses and diabetes, with the date of discharge uncertain. The decision comes a year and 7 months after the ex-president began serving a 17-year prison sentence for embezzlement and bribery. Under law, the execution of a sentence can be suspended if the convicted individual is in poor health, such as being unable to communicate. Only a presidential pardon would enable E to be released fully. The nation's finance chief is urging businesses to refrain from raising wages too much, citing risk of worsening inflation. It could also increase the wage gap between big companies and small ones. Kim Ji-yeon shares with us his remarks.
South Korea's Minister of Economy and Finance Chu Kyung-ho has called for restraints on excessive wage increases that could quicken inflation. His remarks came at a meeting with the KEF, or Korea Enterprises Federation, on Tuesday, and at a time when the country's consumer prices for May jumped more than 5% compared to a year ago, a near 14-year high.
We're concerned that some IT companies and large conglomerates have recently jacked up their wages, and there are signs of this spreading to other industries and companies. Excessive wage increases would also expand the wage gap between large companies and small to mid-sized firms, which could make workers at SMEs feel deprived.
He called on companies to use funds to improve productivity by expanding investment rather than to raise wages to help the country break the vicious cycle of higher wages and prices resulting in higher inflation. Song Kyung-sik, Federation Chief and CJ Group Chairman, said the KEF had advised member companies in April to use their financial resources to employ new workers or improve working conditions for smaller affiliates and subcontractors. In return, Son called on the government to make tax reforms to lower the country's high inheritance tax and deregulatory measures. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Central banks in Asia have been spending the large foreign exchange reserves they've been building up to slow depreciation of their currencies against the U.S. dollar. As a result, the reserves of a number of Asian countries, including South Korea, are at their lowest in years. As of June 17, Thailand's reserves are at their lowest in more than 2 years. In the first half of this month, Malaysia's reserves saw their largest 2-week decline since 2015. Seoul's reserves stand at 447 billion as of May, down 4% from its peak last October. The situation could worsen if the Fed conducts another rate hike next month. By the middle of this century, people who live by themselves are projected to make up 40% of all households in South Korea. When that time comes, the biggest proportion of this group will likely be older than 70. Shin Ha-young zooms in on this expected phenomenon.
30 years from now, in 2050, 3/4 of South Korean households will have just 1 or 2 members. One-person households already accounted for the biggest proportion in 2020. The second biggest proportion of households were married couples with children at 29%. But these families with children will fall to third place by 2050 at just 17.1%. By then, households with just one member will likely rise to 40%. And these individuals will be much older on average than they are now. In 2020, about 37% of people living alone were younger than 40. But by 2050, the largest group of these will be older than 70.
Compared to 2019, the number of unmarried people in single-member households has been increasing at a faster pace. Our estimates also reflect our society's rapid aging and low birth rate.
Because more senior citizens are living alone, an expert says more needs to be done to address the issues of elderly poverty and dying alone.
The biggest problems affecting South Korean seniors are the poverty and mortality rates. The number of seniors dying alone has been increasing rapidly. To solve these problems, we need to strengthen our social welfare policy and facilities so that we can take care of our seniors.
Overall, the number of households in South Korea is likely to hit a peak in 2039 and then go down. 2 years ago, the number of households was around 21 million. The figure is expected to hit almost 24 million by the peak, but will fall to around 23 million in 2050, along with an overall drop in the population. This peak is a year sooner than it was projected 3 years ago. The population as a whole is believed to have already peaked in 2020. 신하영, Arirang News.
It's monsoon season in South Korea. We're seeing short localized downpours, also what some would call guerrilla rainstorms. By Wednesday morning, lower-lying streets in the capital area could have 30 centimeters of more standing water. Shin Yeon provides a closer look.
It's going to be a tough few days here in South Korea. We're expecting to see up to 300 millimeters of rain pound the central part of the country until Thursday. This is where most of the population is located, as it includes Gangwon-do Province, Chungcheong-do Province, and the greater capital region.
Here in Seoul, it's been raining on and off, but overnight we're expecting to see so much rain that by Wednesday morning, we're expecting to see water come up 30 centimeters off the ground. That means we'll have to walk with water coming up around here.
On top of heavy rain, we're also expecting strong winds. As of Tuesday afternoon, the country has already issued strong wind advisories across the nation. Seoraksan Mountain in Gangwon-do Province saw wind speeds of 35.4 meters a second, enough to cause violent destruction. In the capital region, wind speeds were recorded at 20 meters per second, breaking down trees and streetlights. The Korea Meteorological Administration says this is due to the growing air pressure gap from winds flowing in from the north and the south. With the monsoon rain belt quickly moving south, the country is going to be under heavy rainfall for the next few days, which is why weather analysts are advising extra caution.
We are expecting to see most of the rain at night, the hardest time for us to take any sort of measures. We suggest that people should stay indoors and make sure that they have an emergency contact list at hand. We're also asking vacationers near the coast or mountains to be aware of flooding or landslides.
While rainfall will continue throughout the week, southern regions, on the other hand, will see temperatures run high. Shin Yeon, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories now, the Unification Ministry asked North Korea to send notice if it plans to discharge floodwater from dams near the border to prevent damage to people or property in the area, something that has happened in past years. The request was made in a public briefing Tuesday because Seoul got no response from Pyongyang on the cross-border hotlines. This may have been due to technical malfunctions caused by the monsoon rain in the north. The hotlines have since been restored, but as of 4 p.m. local time, there has been no response on the matter. National ID cards may no longer be necessary for a lot of activities here in the country, including banking. From Wednesday, a 2-week trial run begins for an ID card that's stored on smartphones with the existing Android app Gov't 24. It shows the same info as an ID and can be verified if scanned. With the same legal validity as a conventional ID card, it can be used for boarding planes, signing contracts, and much more. An app for iOS will be available later this week. The service officially launches in mid-July. Red fire ants have invaded South Korean harbor and other regions again. They can sting people and also cause various damage. Officials say all of these toxic pests came from China. Kim Jung-sil has the details.
Red fire ants have arrived on South Korean shores again this year. The Ministry of Environment said last Thursday that around 150 of the ants were found in a container stacking area at Busan port. The containers were from China's Guangdong province. And this time, the ants have made it out of the port. Officials said they found some 850 mature red fire ants and 200 young ants in a warehouse in Okcheon that housed a container from the same place. Originally from South America, red fire ants can now be found in the US, China, and Australia. They look like regular ants, except they can sting, and sting bad.
If the ant stings you, it can cause problems. The toxin is about as strong as that of a regular honeybee. Just like with the bees, if you're allergic, it can cause anaphylactic shock.
Experts say they're especially cautious about the possibility of a queen ant, which could let the ants establish a colony. Thankfully, no queen has been found since 2020. This is the 5th consecutive year red fire ants have been found in South Korea. They were first found in 2017, also at the Busan port, and most of those too came from China.
Because the ants are coming in through containers, the port areas are thoroughly inspected. We also use toxic gas to get rid of them if found in harbors or in nature. We're also using traps to see if there are any more of them.
Officials said they have done a thorough inspection of the port and will monitor the situation closely. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
Growing interest in public health as well as the environment has led to greater interest in meat alternatives. What's more, one study shows some products have higher protein content than beef. Chung Eun-ju sheds light on the findings.
This is a restaurant for vegans. It serves steak and burgers made of beans, but the flavor and texture are very similar to the real thing.
I made the patties by implementing high moisture manufacturing technology using soybean protein and tried to bring out the flavor of meat by using charcoal and rice straw.
The Korea Consumer Agency recently studied 15 plant-based meat alternatives and found that the ones that are cholesterol-free actually had higher protein ratios than real beef hamburger patties. However, it was also found that 4 products had relatively high saturated fat ratios due to the process of making them juicy, and 3 products contained excessive sodium in their seasoning. Moreover, all 15 products were meant to be plant-based or vegan, but some contained egg, which vegans cannot eat. There are currently no clear regulations regarding food types or standards for plant-based meat alternatives in South Korea.
To guarantee consumer choice, it's necessary to have a set of labeling standards regarding ingredients and manufacturing for meat alternatives.
The U.S. Food and Drug Administration is preparing to release guidelines within this year for meat alternatives. The Korea Consumer Agency has also decided to make requests to the relevant ministries for meat alternative standards. Chung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
Heavy rain will be lashing down on much of South Korea overnight. A stationary rain front containing heavy moisture has entered the country from the north of the peninsula. Torrential downpours are expected for central regions overnight with locally heavy downpours of 30 to 50 millimeters per hour. Overall, northern central regions will see heavy downpours of up to 300 millimeters. Chungcheongdo provinces will see up to 200 millimeters. Along with the heavy rainfall, be wary of gusty winds overnight. Strong wind advisories are issued for this whole metropolitan area and most of the coastlines. For inland regions, winds will be gusting up to 20 meters per second. Such winds will be capable of blowing down trees and even power lines, and more violent winds are forecast for mountainous regions, so please take extra precautions. Morning lows in Seoul and Chuncheon will be kicking off at 23 degrees Celsius. As for the daily highs, Seoul and Busan will get up to 26 degrees, Gwangju will reach 28 degrees Celsius. Rain will continue across the Seoul metropolitan area until this Friday. It's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
These are the stories we could squeeze into this hour. Wherever you may be tuning in from, good day or good night, depending on your time zone. And as always, from all of us here at Arirang News, thank you so much for watching.